I started my journey into death care about 20 years ago. It was before my senior year of high school during the summer. And I remember distinctly sitting at the kitchen table, and my mom was in the kitchen. The news was on, and they were interviewing local family owned businesses that were looking for help for the summer. And the second one they interviewed was a female that was running a funeral home. And my mom, thinking I was, of the little edgier side of high school, was like, "Oh, you should work at the funeral home for the summer." And I was like, "Well, I will." And I got the job because the lady there knew my grandfather. He was a farmer in the community, and she had other small town funeral homes, and so she knew him. And that was my experience first getting into funeral care, was basically just answering the door, being there during visitation hours, um, driving death certificates back and forth across, the city to get them signed or filed and whatnot. And one day the embalmers in the back invited me in to observe, and kind of, it drew an interest in the restorative process that happens, in American death. But since then, obviously, my opinions of the way that death is done in America have greatly changed. Being involved in a lot of embalmings and things like that early in my experience of this, and now being an advocate and educator for all things green and alternative in death care. So I initially started out being a really skilled restorative artist. Like, if people had been in accidents after embalmings, I would reconstruct their facial features with waxes and different things like that. But I have found that there are other methods that I can use with families that are wanting to see their loved one that has been disfigured in an accident, like the draping of cloth on an unembalmed body, just cleaning up the face some. So I recognize the training that I got early in my career for embalming and stuff have given me some tools in how to care for an unembalmed body now, that are more eco-friendly, by not going with what I was going with prior. So in all this time that I've worked in death care, the beginning of my career was pretty much the educational background that they give you in the United States. I had to learn about natural burial and green burial on my own. And even today, our industry is behind in teaching us about the greener options like alkaline hydrolysis, natural organic reduction, which is happening here in Washington. I'm really excited to say that I'm going to be working with the second facility. Besides Recompose, there's also one called Return Home that will work with anyone. And so any of the families that want to work directly with me, we can go through my establishment that I'm employed at, or they can go directly through the company Return Home to get the natural organic reduction. And then there's also a gentleman in South Washington that's doing it on his land. So I'm really excited to see where that's going to go. Personally, I haven't had a client choose it yet, but I have taken a tour of the Return Home facility, and I am taking a tour of the Herland Forest, which is run by a gentleman named Walt, in the next couple of weeks. It's about an 8-hour drive from where I am in Seattle right now, but I look forward to checking that out. I'm not sure where you guys are in the process of getting water cremation, even recognized or looked at where you're at, but some background on that. It's an eco-friendly form of disposition in the sense that your body is broken down with water and lye, which is a 95% water to 5% lye mixture. The lye is the sodium hydroxide and the sodium potassium, and that creates the corrosive that breaks down your soft tissues. And when you consider that 85% of your body is made up of water anyway, what is left is amino acids, peptides, fat cells, and water. All of that can be reincorporated back into nature. There is a facility in Oregon that has sod farmers come and pick up what they call the effluent. And so the families know that the liquid portion of their loved one is going to go out and make grass green. And then the calcium phosphate that's left, the bone, can be put into an urn and then done with what they choose to do there. I haven't, since moving to the Washington area, I haven't had a family that's chosen natural burial, and we are limited in our cemetery space out here for that, because all of the cemeteries out here require a vault. But the way that I do a workaround with that is, in the Jewish community, they do something called butter dishing the vault, where a vault is a concrete box designed to keep the ground steady above the grave when you're burying a casket. But if you're doing a natural burial, you don't have the ground breaking down from driving big machinery over the graves. So what we would do, if they require that vault in a cemetery, we butter dish it. So instead of it being like this in the ground and then laying the body or the casket in it and putting the lid on, we put the body or the casket into the grave first, and then flip the vault over and go over the body. So then that way the family can still add some dirt or flowers over the deceased body before having that extra layer put over it to maintain the structural integrity of the graveyard or the cemetery, where the big cemeteries have like the industrial stuff that drives everywhere. When I was in Austin, Texas, I was really fortunate to be able to work closely with Ellen McDonald, who created Eloise Woods Natural Burial Park. And Eloise Woods was set out on just underneath 10 acres of land, because in the state of Texas, if you were at 10 acres or over, then the State Cemetery Association could have a say in what went on at your park. So she did her research and set it under 10 acres with the help of the Funeral Consumer Alliance, giving her some tips there. And we were able to facilitate burials with just 18 inches of ground soil above the deceased. So I don't know how much of this you know, but all the good microbial action is in that first 3 feet of soil. So you don't want a 6-foot burial. Everybody's like, why aren't you doing 6 feet burials? Well, that was back in the Victorian era when you had to worry about the plague and different things like that. I mean, granted, we are in the COVID times, but with proper sanitation, you can still have a natural burial with that. So yeah, I had a lot of experience in introducing that kind of concept to the community with Ellen. And of course, having a dog as a sidekick is always a good facilitator to get people to talk about death too. So while I was at Eloise Woods, I was contacted by somebody that created the mushroom burial shroud. And something that Lynn wanted me to touch on was some of my experience with some of the products that are marketed to families out there that you may see them, you know, share on Facebook and different things like that. And my favorite one to talk about is the mushroom burial shroud. So I met J. Rim Lee at a death salon that was put on by the Order of the Good Death in Houston, Texas. And she expressed to me that she was wanting to do a test burial at Eloise Woods, knew that I had connections with Ellen. So we had a few discussions. She got a hold of a researcher at the University of Texas, which is in Austin. And one day everything aligned, and I found the perfect family that wanted a natural burial, that was willing to have their loved one be a test subject, basically. The idea and what ended up happening was that PVC pipe was placed in the ground in the corner of the grave, and a camera was ran down through the PVC pipe in order to get photographs of the different stages of the decomposition process and where the fabric was in producing the mushrooms in order to facilitate the breakdown. In addition to that, the PVC pipe would also allow for them to take soil samples at different stages of the decomposition process. And the hope was that they'd be able to come out with proof and evidence that the shroud would do what the test had produced. The testing that put J. Lee on the TED Talks and different things like that, that built up a lot of momentum behind this product, was the fact that she had a terrarium in her kitchen and used fingernail clippings and hair to get the mushrooms to take off and eat them. And it worked indoors in a climate controlled environment. However, it turned out that it did not work in real life in Austin, Texas, in the ground. She did not tell us this. After 6 months of research, she ghosted the researcher. The researcher reached out to me to hand over the cat burial shrouds that she left behind, because we were also supposed to do cat burials. I had made a partnership, kind of an agreement with the local animal shelter on animals that had came in sick or something. We'd do natural burial on them. So anyway, she completely ghosted the lady, and I ended up with a bunch of cat shrouds that smell like mushroom pizzas. And when I put this out on my Instagram to try to let people know that there was no research that proved that this actually worked in real life, we got silence, radio silence, from emails and reaching out to J. Lee. She wouldn't give us any answers. And in addition to that, I had people that were reaching out to me on Instagram and saying that they had tried to buy an animal shroud. This was all right after the Luke Perry was buried in a mushroom shroud media frenzy kind of hit. And Luke Perry was an American actor that was probably in his early 40s. So he was kind of young and had chosen a mushroom shroud. She actually was spoke at his funeral. The daughter of Luke Perry ended up reaching out to me on Instagram after seeing some of the information about the shroud. Not actually working, but in conversation with her, what I told her was, it doesn't matter, your father still had what he wanted. He was buried in a shroud on his own land in Tennessee. So whether or not mushrooms were involved in it, he still had the return home that he wanted to have, the return to the earth that he envisioned for himself. So yeah, I've had people reach out to me and say that they never received product that they paid for. And to this day, I still have not heard from the creator. It is still a product that is supported by the Order of the Good Death. And J. Lee is also still a active board member for that organization as well. And no one will address why the shroud does not actually work. So that was my personal experience with that one. Another one I have been vocal about since its introduction has anybody seen the egg that grows a tree out of it? That's not real, y'all. It's not real. It's a concept, and they've now made a little urn, and it seems like everybody's taking off with these tree urn things, but I'd like to tell you what happens when you introduce water to cremated remains. You get bricks, concrete bricks. And now, at first I used to have families that would tell me that they got a tree urn and that grandma died again because like the roots got into the concrete and it just. So what I like to tell families when they mention products like that is how not to spend their money on that when they can just, mix cremated remains in with soil and plant a tree on their land, and cremated remains, water cremated remains, none of that is going to be beneficial. The pH is actually negative on flame cremated remains and would be detrimental to a plant. So if people do elect to be broken down by fire or water, it's best to do a healthy mixture in the ground, to prevent from becoming just a little solid rock of something. So, let's see, the tree one. Yeah, we can't fold people into that. So the egg thing, you would have a hard time transporting that from the place of death to a cemetery. If you did a burial that deep, you're basically going to have a bog body, which if you've done any natural burials, and I didn't get to hear Chuck's presentation last time, but when you do a new natural burial, the ground around it, the new plant life dies, because it's like, just like with human composting or any kind of composting, the ground heats up as the microbial action starts taking off. And so any new plant life that's got roots and things in that area, it can kill it. So I'm not really sure, what they were going to go with that, but it's just another thing that at least these products get people talking. And as long as we're still educating people, whether it's 5 to 7 or 10 people at a time, they can go out there and get the word out on these different things as they see them pop up online, and they can be the professional that knows this is what happens when you actually, try to use these products, and what you can do instead that the family can have more control over, and things of that nature. So what's different between Washington and Texas? I worked hard on the 2019 legislative session to get water cremation legalized in Texas. And that was when I learned that everything I learned in history class in high school was baloney. Because to make a bill a law, you actually have to pay politicians under the table. It's called lobbying for something. You have to hire a lobbyist to then schmooze the politician to get them to vote yes on your bill going through. And when your state funeral directors association is having no part of that because they are confused in regards to, they have the big corporate SCI entity, the evil empire of funerals in our area. I don't know if y'all have those there, but they're very high donors to the Texas Funeral Service Commission and the Funeral Directors Association. And they don't want to invest in the new technology of the water cremation because they've put all their money into flame retorts. So becoming more eco-friendly would mean an investment on their part, which means less profit. So they didn't want to see this bill go through, and our state association wasn't going to have anything to do with it. So pounding the pavement, visiting the legislators and the different people that were supposed to vote on these bills did absolutely no good. It's all the stuff that they tell you to go do, as a trailblazer. But then what it comes down to is, do you have money in your back pocket to buy these votes? So Texas is a very slow state to change, especially with them having the big corporation funeral entities seated within it. The human composting aspect, they're wanting to go with it that way, but they don't think they can get the two processes through the legislation without having them on the same bill together and having the funeral directors behind it. So in Washington, it's already legal here. I don't have to do that. I can instead put my focus on educating the public, whether, now I'm employed by a family-run funeral home, but they own 4 different funeral homes. And the community that I'm serving right now is there are a lot of Asian community, the Vietnamese, the Chinese, and we've got Ethiopians. So we're doing a lot of embalming at the funeral home that I'm working at, but through the community channels like Facebook groups, neighborhood groups, I'm able to tell people, hey, not only, are we serving this part of the community, but I can tell you how to find water cremation, or how to have a home funeral, or how to have more involvement in the care of your loved one. It doesn't matter where I'm working. I still have this resource that I can help the community in that sense. I'm really excited to say, since I've joined the funeral home that I'm at, I have helped facilitate 4 home viewings, like vigils after the loved one died. They didn't know that they could keep their loved one at home. They thought they had to immediately release to the funeral home. and I let them know that they could keep their loved one there. All we needed to do was put like gel packs on their abdomen, just keep the core cool. You can have people come and go and visit and bring flowers, and then we'll just wrap them all up in the bundle of flowers and lay them in their cremation casket. You can witness the cremation happen. Just being able, that brings me so much joy, is to be able to educate people on what they can get when they have to involve a funeral home and how much they actually can be involved. So that kind of ties up everything off the top of my head. I did see down here in the chat the Let Your Love Grow product. I have photographs. So this company sent that product to Ellen McDonald at Eloise Woods. And Ellen at the time had made an agreement with a pet crematory that had just emerged in the Austin area that ended up going corporate. Her agreement with them was that the animals that were communally cremated could be scattered in this little section of land, but they were to mix it with the Let Your Love Grow product so it would not damage, you know, the little ravine that she was allowing this company to, what ended up being barrels and barrels and barrels of cremated remains being dumped there. She wanted to test some of it out that they had dumped. And so she took it and put some in a flower bed that she had set up with marigolds. She had some cremated remains of her own cat that hadn't been treated and some that had been treated with the Let Your Love Grow product according to this pet crematory, and actually had some of her own Let Your Love Grow product. And in all of the test phases, the plants died. So from our experience with the product, we did not see it work. So at this time, I don't know if it actually works to the way that it claims to, because from what I saw, it didn't look good.
But I was going to ask, so in the Czech Republic, there's a group called To the Roots. I don't know if you know of Monica and Blanca up there, but they're doing, because the Czech Republic have such a high proportion of cremation there, it's like 97% in Prague or something. They've started what they're calling a natural burial ground, but they're using, it's for cremated remains. And they've worked out that if they bury, the remains still go hard. But if they bury a metre away from the base of a tree, and it's an established tree, and they only do 3 at any tree in any 5-year period, they've not seen any detrimental effects with any of their trees.
Okay, is this where they're putting the plaques at the base of the tree?
Oh, on the trunks, yeah.
Yeah, okay, I've seen this, and I think it's a phenomenal idea.
Yeah, I was amazed because I'd heard, like,
have young roots that are busting through it or anything like that, because they would all be established.
I'm just wondering about what people are buried in, like cardboard coffins or shrouds or so on for the natural burials. What's the go?
So it kind of depends on the family. My last Austin family that did it used a cardboard box because they kept the loved one in the home for 48 hours, and the cardboard box was in the living room and the children painted on it. And then here I've done a couple of, well, I've done one, I forgot, Muslim burial. That was my one shrouded natural burial here, but they still had the vault. With a shroud, you can get creative in how you place flowers in the bindings. When I shroud a body, I like to bind around the neck, the shoulders, at the elbows, the mid waist, the knees, and the ankles. So you're a little kind of mummy wrapped up, and you've got all those places to put natural flora and fauna, or like little cutout hearts or something like that. You know, family can get involved that way. If you have Instagram, you know, and you want to go look at some photos about that, or even, you know, on my Facebook, it's really beautiful. And, you know, even if you're limited to what you can find, even just having clippers in the area and just getting some natural stuff or stuff from your yard that were personal to your person.
Melissa, with the cardboard boxes, when you have the deceased in the box at home during the vigil, does the cardboard box, like transporting it up post vigil to the burial site, does the box deteriorate in any way? I mean, I have one here in my living room which I did paint, but I'm just wondering about the viability of the box if you also use it for the vigil as well.
My suggestion would be to have wood on hand, whether it's a wood carrying base that just sticks out a little bit wider than your box, where people can hold something until they get it over the grave, and straps lower it down. Even with the shrouds, they have pockets in some of the pre-made ones where you can put in like a thing of wood that basically keeps the bodies rigid over the grave when you have the straps before it's lowered in. So when dealing with cardboard, I think it is important to have that extra thought about what you need for rigidity, even if you're just laying a few 2x4s or something, 2x4s, something like that in the base, just to keep it a little bit rigid and easier for people to transport, so you don't have the weight in the middle bowing it out.
Yeah, thank you. That's great.
Two things about natural burial. You mentioned just 18 inches of soil above the body in the States. Here it's at least a metre. Yeah. The other thing is with the new roots that affect the, you know, a natural burial affects the roots. So that would just be in trees and shrubs that are planted new over a natural burial site. Is that right?
We even noticed it with a tree that was about 6 feet away from a new burial. There was some new plant life near another grave that particular burial, she contributed to taking it out, because everything within, you know, a radius of that grave died shortly thereafter the burial. So that was just that experience.
Yeah. So
you got to consider how close the roots are going to be to the actual everything that's going on. So if y'all are burying a meter down, that's much further than what these burials were being buried at. So I wouldn't guess that your roots would be too close to what all the heat.
Animals was much lower than, well, more than 18 inches. I thought it was more like 800 or 900.
So they may be able to smell it, but on all the history of the world, have you ever read a book where animals dug up the grave and ate the dead man? It's really, it comes down to, it's too much work for a dead meal. And so we've actually she had a lot of wildlife out at the natural burial park, like coyotes and stray dogs that had been dumped and hogs, and none of them ever dug up graves. Hi.
Thank you. You gave me a lot of information. You know, I've been known about mushroom suits and the eggs and all the rest of that stuff, but you know, I'm still just working off of what I read, and I really appreciate your real life experience and your stories about all those little gimmicky things.
Thank you. I appreciate that. If somebody wants a mushroom shroud, just take them to the fabric store to pick out a beautiful fabric with mushrooms printed all over it, and there you have your perfect mushroom shroud, and it didn't cost you $2,500.
Excellent.